In this lesson, we'll create soft jaw geometry. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to create a projected sketch and use extrude to remove material. In Fusion 360, we want to carry on with our multi-axis multiple setups. We're still in the design workspace, and we want to begin by creating geometry to cut our soft jaws. To do this, we can hide our stock and our fixture assembly and focus solely on our link and the soft jaw fixture. The first step that we want to do is make sure that the soft jaw fixture is in the right location. To do this, I'm going to ground the subplate by right-clicking and selecting Ground. Now everything should be fixed in place, so nothing is going to move. With the subplate fixed, we can also hide geometry that we don't need to see. We don't need to see the subplate, we don't need to see the base or the hardware, and we don't need to see the front and rear jaws. We really only need to focus on the soft jaws. To get started, we want to activate the component we're working on. In this case, it'll be the front soft jaw. We're going to start a sketch, and we can determine where we want that sketch to be. In some cases, sketching directly on the top of the soft jaw is going to be the best option. But since we know we're going to be cutting material, we also have the available option to sketch on the top of the link itself. This will automatically project that geometry into our sketch. So I'm going to grab that top face and create a new sketch. Automatically bringing in these references will help us when we begin creating our geometry. I'm going to start by using the line tool and pick up off this corner and simply draw it straight down. I'm going to come over to the right and go back to this point on the right hand side. Then I can use my horizontal vertical constraint and also apply a dimension. In this case, the dimension is simply going to represent the material that needs to be removed. So we want to make sure that this is just outside of the edge of our vise, and once we add a 1-inch dimension, now that's fully defined. Another thing that we need to be aware of is the fact that we need the rest of the soft jaw. So since we chose the top of the link, we need to go project and include and project the top of the fixture, or in this case, our soft jaw. Once we do that, this should give us a few different areas which we can use to remove material. If we want to, we can also double click on this inside edge, which we don't need, and convert it to construction. That makes the selection process a little bit easier when we go to remove the material. Now that we have our sketch created, there's something else that we want to consider. If we want to remove the material from both the front and the rear soft jaw at the same time, we can include that information while we're creating this operation. Right now, we just have it drawn on one side. We can either create a mirror to the other side, or we can add our additional lines. For example, we can come up, over, and back down. Once again, apply that same constraint, and we can even use the equal constraint, making sure that these two lines stay equal, meaning we only have that single dimension. Also note that we could use a coincident or a collinear representation between this back edge and these horizontal lines. That would still give us all the geometry we need, but sometimes you need to define the type of construction geometry and the type of dimensions or constraints based on what you're doing. The last thing that I want to do is select the top face of the other soft jaw and project that as well. Once we do that, we now have that same selection on both sides. There are some other things that we need to consider, but for right now, let's go ahead and finish the sketch. I'm going to hide the link for just a moment and start by creating an extrude. I'm going to be extruding these two regions, and I'll begin dragging this down so that it's removing material from the soft jaws. We don't know exactly how far to go, and this is where we need to bring the link back. Right now, the soft jaws are solid, which means that we're having difficulty seeing exactly where we need to go to. So I'll temporarily hide the rear, and for my distance, I'm going to select To Object and select the bottom face of my soft jaw. I'll bring back the rear soft jaw, expand Objects to Cut, and make sure that we're only removing it from the link. We'll say OK, and take a look at the results. Notice that it actually removed it from the link because I made a mistake in that feature. Also notice that right now we're only seeing the sketch and not the extrude. And that's because the extrude was actually placed inside the link because that was the only body it affected. If you make this mistake, we can either edit the feature or we can use undo. I'm going to use undo and simply go back and recreate this operation. Once again, we want to go ahead and take that up to a specific point. So I'll temporarily hide the rear soft jaw. I want to make sure that we are showing the link and that the distance is to a selected object to the bottom of that link. Next, we'll bring back the rear soft jaw, and to make sure that we don't cut from the link, we have to deselect the link and not the front and rear soft jaws. Even though it's still showing as red, it's not going to cut through the link. We can also hide the link if that's a concern. Once we do that, let's say OK and take a look at the results. So now we've removed some geometry, but if we bring the link back, we'll notice that this isn't really going to work. We haven't removed the right amount of material. But once again, we can always go back and edit these parametrically controlled features, and if we want to add more regions to the extrude cut, we simply need to select them. Make sure that the objects to cut are not involving the link, and then we can say OK. Now that we've removed that material, you can see that we have enough clearance to place the link here, and we're referencing these flat faces on either side and the flat in the center. There is one more thing that we need to be aware of, and I'll view this from the bottom to make sure that it's apparent. Whenever we're creating these soft jaw fixtures, we want to be careful not to exactly match the fillet radii in these internal corners. If there's any problems in machining the link itself, if this fillet radius has some chatter, or if there's just a difference in the radius that actually gets cut, well, it's not going to fit in your soft jaw properly, and we need to use the soft jaw for accurate representations. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we understand ways in which we can modify this. It can be done at the sketch level, or we can use direct modeling tools to make these adjustments. While we're inside the design workspace, I want to make sure that I inspect and I measure the radius so I understand that it's a 1/2 inch radius. One thing that we can try to do is use a tool such as press pull. We can select this and we can begin moving it around. Notice that it's moving all of the attached walls. If we select new offset and begin moving it, you'll notice again it's moving all the walls because of the tangency. We can't modify the existing feature, unfortunately, because there is no feature there. We didn't create that fillet with a feature. So in this case, the best way for us to modify this is to simply select these faces and then hit delete on the keyboard or go to modify and delete. It's going to patch those, and then we can use those patched corners to add a new fillet with the proper radius. Once we have that done, we'll select fillet. We're going to grab all 4 corners at the same time to simplify the control, and then we'll begin dragging this in. Remember that we had a 1/2 inch radius. If we have a larger radius, such as 0.75, and we bring our link back, we can take a look at the difference. I'm going to activate the top level, and I'm going to rotate this around, and just simply make sure that I have that small gap between these 2 corners. We're still referencing this flat, we're still referencing this flat, but now we don't have to worry about a perfect fit in those corners. So once again, this is a great way for us to make these modifications. When we go to our home view, you'll notice that it's upside down, but we can always use the view cube to get to a better orientation. And once again, we can always create named views that represent the specific isometric orientation. So for us, we can just click and go back to that named view. At this point, we need to do a little bit more work on the soft jaw, but it's a great time for us to save before moving on to the next step.